Welcome to True Crime Audio Pod, where we unravel the threads of the most disturbing true crime stories. In today's story, we follow the gripping case of Jon Weatherred, a high school tennis coach whose obsession and jealousy led to a shocking crime. What began as relentless phone calls and desperate pleas soon escalated into a murder-for-hire plot and a staged alibi. As investigators unraveled the evidence, a web of deception, eyewitness accounts, and forensic science painted a damning picture. With a dramatic trial, a guilty verdict, and a life sentence, this tale of betrayal and justice proves that the truth always finds its way to the surface. The Woodlands, an affluent enclave of 20,000 residents, sat just within the southern boundary of Montgomery County, Texas. A peaceful, well-manicured community, it was a place where crime was a rare and unsettling anomaly. 15 miles to the north lay Conroe, the county seat, and just 25 miles south, the sprawling metropolis of Houston pulsed with urban life. On the morning of Monday, December 12, 1988, Pam Bean steered her car into the driveway of her red brick, three-bedroom home in the Woodlands. The sky overhead was a blanket of thick clouds, but the air remained mild, offering no indication of the horror waiting inside. Pam hadn't planned to be home at this hour. She had already left for work earlier that morning, departing at precisely 7:45 a.m., leaving behind her fiancé, William Bill Strawn, who was already dressed and preparing to deposit her paycheck at the bank. It was supposed to be a routine day, but just an hour and a half later, a gnawing unease took hold of her when she failed to reach Bill by phone. Her first call to the house went unanswered. She tried again. Still nothing. A pit of unease formed in her stomach. When she dialed his apartment, a short 25-minute drive away, there was no response there either. Bill was supposed to be home. He was supposed to pick up the check and go to the bank. Where was he? The two had spent the previous night together, their last few weeks as an engaged couple, slipping away before they would finally exchange vows in the warmth of the Christmas season. Their love was the kind that captivated friends and family, a whirlwind romance that left no doubt in anyone's mind that they were meant to be together. But in that moment, standing in her driveway, the joy of their upcoming wedding was drowned out by the thudding of her own heartbeat. Pam stepped out of the car, her pulse accelerating with every step toward the house. She entered through the garage, her fingers grazing the door handle before she turned it. It was unlocked, just as she had left it earlier that morning. That in itself didn't alarm her, but the silence that met her on the other side of the door sent a shiver up her spine. She hesitated. "Bill?" Her voice wavered slightly as she called his name. No answer. She moved cautiously forward, her senses sharpening. The house was unrecognizable. What had been a neat, orderly home just an hour and a half ago was now in complete chaos. Furniture was overturned, belongings strewn about the floor. Objects that should have been in their places lay carelessly discarded. The eerie stillness wrapped around her like a vice, suffocating, unnatural. Her breath caught in her throat, her heartbeat a deafening drum in her ears as she moved further inside. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and then she saw him. Her world tilted as her gaze landed on the living room floor. There, motionless and face down, was Bill. For a fraction of a second, time itself seemed to stop. Then, with a strangled gasp, a scream tore from her throat, shattering the silence. The man she loved, the man she was to marry in just 3 weeks, lay before her in a horrifying stillness that could mean only one thing. Death had entered their home that morning, and it had stolen Bill away forever. Pam darted to the phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. Her call was routed to a Houston operator, causing an agonizing delay. It took 10 minutes before the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department in Conroe finally received the distress call. The Woodlands had no local police force, leaving the community under the jurisdiction of the sheriff's office. Minutes before noon, the call was answered by a dispatcher at the law enforcement center in Conroe. Deputy Patrolman Anthony Clonaris and Robert Dunn were the first to arrive at the Bean residence. A sobbing Pam met them at the door, barely able to speak, and gestured toward the living room. One of the officers knelt beside Bill's motionless body, pressing his fingers to the man's neck. No pulse, A single gunshot wound to the back of the head told them everything they needed to know. Moving swiftly, the officers conducted a hot search of the home, checking for any sign that the perpetrator was still inside. Finding nothing, they radioed their office for detectives and crime scene technicians. Within minutes, an ambulance from the county's emergency medical service arrived, but there was no need for urgency. The paramedics confirmed what was already clear. Bill Strawn was dead. Detective Sergeant Tracy Peterson, Detective Ricky Staggs, and Lieutenant H.B. Harris arrived to take over the investigation, accompanied by crime scene technician George Mixon, identification section head Noel Stanley, and ID technician George Tones. The scene before them was both typical and perplexing. On the surface, it appeared to be a burglary gone wrong. Bill's billfold was on a table near the fireplace, his credit cards removed and scattered across the surface. The wallet had been emptied of cash, and investigators would later determine that between $90 and $150 was missing. More significantly, Pam's endorsed paycheck, worth slightly over $600, was gone. However, the check stub and deposit slip remained untouched on the counter. Bill's car was also missing, a further indication that this was more than just a simple home invasion. The house itself was in complete disarray, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, contents spilled onto the floor. Red canisters had been emptied into the sink, their discarded contents a testament to a frantic search for valuables. Yet, despite the appearance of a rushed crime, something felt off. The canisters, once emptied, had been carefully placed back in a neat row on the cabinet. It was an unsettling detail, one that suggested this crime scene wasn't what it seemed. Even more telling, none of the luxurious valuables in the home had been taken or even disturbed. The deviation from a standard burglary led investigators to a troubling conclusion. This scene was a cover-up. Someone had gone to great lengths to stage a robbery, to mislead them, to throw them off track. But behind the chaos was a chilling reality. Someone had executed Bill Strawn in cold blood. Inspecting the living room and surrounding rooms, detectives noted the conspicuous absence of struggle. Bill was a large, athletic man. If he had sensed danger, if he had seen his killer coming, there would have been a fight. But there were no signs of one. Instead, it seemed Bill had been taken by surprise, caught off guard by someone he never expected to harm him. The position of Strawn's body suggested a grim execution. He had been forced to lie on the floor, arms stretched overhead in what investigators referred to as the surrender position. The fatal shot had been delivered to the back of his head, slightly left of center. There was no chance of survival. Death had been instantaneous. Although the final conclusions would await the autopsy, the nature of the wound spoke volumes. The large size of the injury indicated a high-caliber weapon, and the presence of soot and stippling suggested a contact wound. The gun had been pressed directly against Strawn's skull before the trigger was pulled. No weapon was found inside or outside the single-story home. Investigators were left piecing together how the murderer had arrived. The most obvious answer lay in the fact that Strawn's car was missing. If another vehicle had been used to approach the house, it could indicate the presence of multiple perpetrators. It was a chilling possibility. As some detectives fanned out through the densely wooded neighborhood to interview potential witnesses, Lieutenant Norris and Detective Sergeant Peterson sat down with Pam Bean. Though still shaken, she had calmed enough to answer their questions. Pam recounted that everything had been normal when she left for work at 7:45 that morning. There had been no signs of trouble, no indication that danger lurked nearby. She had left the garage door open, expecting Bill to leave soon after her. Later that morning, she had called Bill at his office, only to be told that he had not shown up. Concern mounted as co-workers also failed to reach him. His relatives had been contacted as well, but no one had any information. When one of his family members reached out to Pam, her unease turned to dread. She had called home once more, and when there was still no answer, she wasted no time. She got in her car and drove straight home, fear tightening its grip with every mile. Meanwhile, Bill's concerned colleagues had driven to his apartment, only to find it empty. With no sign of him there, they called for a police officer to meet them outside the building. As they waited, the officer received an urgent message from dispatch. He was needed at Pam Bean's residence immediately. Moments later, as Bill's coworkers followed the officer to the scene, they arrived to the devastating news. Their friend had been found dead, murdered in cold blood on the living room floor. Pam Bean recounted her past to the detectives, detailing how she had moved to the Woodlands from Lubbock, Texas, the previous summer, 500 miles away. A divorced mother of two, she had sought a fresh start with a new job at a business in Conroe. Her decision to leave Lubbock stemmed from a faltering romance with a man she had first met in a bar. The man, Jon Weatherred, was a 30-year-old high school tennis coach from Plainview, a small town just north of Lubbock. With his charm and easy confidence, he had initially swept Pam off her feet. He claimed to be a scout for the University of Las Vegas basketball team and even hinted at being recruited by the CIA. Though she later learned he was only a high school tennis coach, her interest in him had not immediately diminished. However, as time went on, Jon's behavior eroded her attraction. His arrogance, controlling tendencies, and habit of standing her up on dates left her frustrated. It became evident that his interest in her was waning. Disillusioned and tired of the on-again, off-again relationship, Pam decided to leave it all behind and start anew. 2 months after settling into her job in Conroe, she went on a blind date with Bill Strawn. According to Pam, it was love at first sight. Though she had still seen Jon sporadically, their relationship was already cooling. The blind date with Bill, however, marked a turning point. Bill Strawn was a well-liked and accomplished man. At 35, he had a strong athletic build from his days as a star athlete at Ganado High School. His talents extended beyond sports. He excelled academically and had once been voted a class favorite. Those same qualities carried into adulthood, making him a respected figure in his community. He had spent the past 3 years working as a purchasing agent for a Conroe medical supply company and had recently become the youngest member of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. Pam described her romance with Bill as intense and immediate. "I fell in love with him. It was like freight trains. I remember the date because I marked it on my appointment calendar. It changed my life." Within 2 weeks of their first meeting, they were planning a future together. Their wedding date was set for New Year's Eve. When investigators pressed Pam about anyone who might have wanted to harm Bill, she mentioned Jon Weatherred. She recalled how he had become distraught and obsessed upon hearing of her engagement. He flooded her and her friends in Conroe with calls, desperate to learn more about Bill. He made repeated attempts to gather information about Bill's background, particularly his workplace. The detectives explained to Pam that the crime scene did not resemble the work of a professional burglar. Despite the disarray, valuable items had been left untouched, and nothing had been significantly damaged. They suspected the scene had been staged to mislead them into believing Bill was killed during a break-in. "That's why we need to know about his personal relationships, anything that might have happened, or anyone who had made any threats," the detectives told her. That prompted another memory. Pam revealed that her ex-husband, to whom she had been married for 9 years, had once been involved in a troubling incident shortly after their divorce. He had kept a key to their Lubbock home and had broken in without her knowledge. When she returned, she found a chilling sight: a bullet-riddled target-shooting silhouette pinned to a dartboard on her bedroom wall. The sinister message had disturbed her at the time, and she had confided in Jon about it. However, she had never reported it to the police, believing then that it was unsettling but not an imminent threat. Now, with Bill's murder weighing on her, she wondered if she had underestimated the danger lurking in her past. Pam Bean told detectives that her ex-husband had shoved her around several times during their marriage, but had never been overtly violent. She had not heard from him since the unsettling incident involving the target-shooting silhouette. Beyond the tennis coach and her ex-husband, Pam mentioned another individual, a close friend of Jon Weatherred. When she had first been introduced to this man, Jon had described him as someone who would lie or die for me. Pam recalled that this friend had been visibly upset when she broke off her relationship with Weatherred, Investigators planned to track down this associate. Meanwhile, they canvassed the neighborhood, hoping to find witnesses who had noticed anything suspicious near the Bean residence. Their efforts soon paid off. A teenage girl living nearby recalled running to the front of her house at 7:55 a.m. to check for the school bus. She happened to glance toward the Bean home and saw that the garage door was open. Inside, a car was still parked, and beside it, a man was crouching. She couldn't see his face, only his dark hair and part of his cheek, but she noticed he wore a jacket with a furry collar. His behavior struck her as odd, but she assumed he was checking something on the car. Given how often Bill Strawn visited the house, she had initially thought it might have been him. Another neighbor reported seeing a strange man walking up her driveway around 7:30 a.m. that same morning. She had caught sight of him through the garage window just before her husband raised the door. As soon as the door began to open, the man abruptly veered toward the street. She was certain she would recognize him if she saw him again. "I'd never seen him before," she told investigators. "I was concerned because it was too early for working people to be around." The woman also noted that the man was wearing a brown jacket with a fur collar, matching the teenager's description. No other neighbor reported seeing a suspicious vehicle in the area. However, a woman who had left her house on an errand just before 8 a.m. remembered that Strawn's car was still in the garage at that time. When she returned 15 minutes later, the car was gone. If these accounts were accurate, investigators determined that the murder had likely occurred between 7:45 a.m., shortly after Pam had left, and 8:15 a.m. When the neighbor noticed Strawn's Oldsmobile was no longer in the garage. No one, however, had actually seen the car drive away. Inside the Beanie house, the crime scene team meticulously dusted for fingerprints. Before removing the body, they documented the scene with photographs and video recordings, capturing the ransacked living room and other areas that had been disturbed. The fingerprint specialist examined Bill Strawn's credit cards, wallet, Pam's deposit slip, and the stub that had been left behind. Yet, not a single unknown print was found. Even on the canisters that had been emptied into the sink and then neatly placed back, no foreign prints surfaced. The lack of any unaccounted-for prints strongly suggested that the killer had worn gloves. A search of the house and its surrounding property yielded no sign of the murder weapon or any definitive leads. There was no evidence of forced entry, leading detectives to believe that the killer had gained access through the open garage door. During the autopsy, a single bullet was retrieved from Strawn's head. The projectile was from a heavy-caliber weapon, possibly a .38 caliber or a .357 Magnum. The pathologist confirmed that the shot had been fired at close range. Additionally, he found a bruise on the victim's face, indicating that his head had been forcefully pressed against the floor. Other findings suggested that the shooter had grabbed Strawn by the back of his collar and lifted his head just before pulling the trigger. The conclusion was chillingly clear. This had been a cold-blooded, execution-style murder. Detectives quickly broadcast an alert for Bill Strawn's 1988 Oldsmobile, sending descriptions over the airwaves and through police teletype networks. However, as the hours stretched on, no sightings of the missing vehicle were reported. On Tuesday morning, investigators turned their attention to the three men Pam Bean had mentioned, determined to account for their whereabouts during the crucial window of the murder. Investigators began making calls, hoping to easily eliminate suspects. They contacted Plainview High School, where a school official confirmed that Coach Jon Weatherred was currently on campus teaching his physical education classes. However, the official added a crucial detail. Weatherred had been absent on Monday, reportedly out sick. He had arranged for a substitute teacher to cover his classes. This revelation raised more questions than it answered. If Weatherred had truly been ill, it should have been easy to verify. But without confirmation, the investigators had no choice but to keep him on their suspect list. In contrast, confirming the whereabouts of Pam Bean's ex-husband was far simpler. The former professional ball player had been at work on Monday, with multiple witnesses, including his employer and colleagues, verifying his presence. Investigators also accounted for his activities on Sunday night, concluding that he could be ruled out as a suspect. The final name on the list, Weatherred's close friend, the one who reportedly would lie or die for him, would be investigated later. For now, detectives needed to focus on Weatherred himself. "I think we better get to Plainview and talk to Mr. Weatherred in person," Detective Peterson said. His superior agreed. That Tuesday afternoon, Detectives Peterson and Norris boarded a flight to Lubbock. From there, they traveled to nearby Plainview, where they consulted Texas Ranger Jim Mull about the case. Early Wednesday morning, the three lawmen arrived at Plainview High School to question Jon Weatherred. Upon introducing themselves, they immediately noted the coach's demeanor. He was visibly nervous. His hands and feet trembled, and at one point, he even sat on his hands to hide the shaking. During questioning, Weatherred provided a rambling and unconvincing account of his activities on the day of the murder. He claimed he had spent most of Monday, December 12th, in Lubbock, attempting to schedule an appointment with a dermatologist for a skin rash. Gesturing to his face, he insisted that he had needed medical attention, but investigators saw no visible signs of irritation or a rash. Weatherred also claimed he had spent part of that day shopping for a birthday present for his young son, a toy Ghostbuster gun. However, despite visiting multiple stores, he admitted he had not actually purchased anything. Detectives found it odd that he would take a day off work without securing a doctor's appointment, and that he had gone shopping for a gift but returned empty-handed. When asked if he had used credit cards that might verify his location, Weatherred quickly stated that he did not own any. "Am I a suspect in this?" Weatherred asked. "Does Pam think I would do something like that?" The detectives remained neutral, explaining that they were simply verifying information to determine if anyone knew anything about the murder. If Weatherred's Monday timeline was suspicious, his explanation for his whereabouts on Sunday night was even more bizarre. He claimed that on the evening before the murder, he had traveled to Lubbock to track down an old college friend, hoping to enlist help in finding some heavies. According to Weatherred, he had been attacked by two men in a parking lot at Plainview High School and feared for his safety. He wanted to hire tough individuals to protect him. Weatherred stated that he had canceled a planned hunting trip to make the trip to Lubbock. However, after failing to locate his friend, he allegedly spent the freezing night sleeping in his pickup truck. The following morning, he returned to Plainview to deliver lesson plans to his substitute teacher before heading back to Lubbock in search of a dermatologist and a birthday gift, neither of which he found. Detectives left the interview unconvinced. Weatherred's story was riddled with inconsistencies, questionable decisions, and unverifiable details. If he had nothing to hide, why did his account feel so contrived? Coach Jon Weatherred adamantly denied having been in Conroe or anywhere near it on the night before or the day of Bill Strawn's murder. His nervous demeanor, along with inconsistencies in his alibi, raised red flags for investigators. However, without concrete evidence linking him to the crime, they had no choice but to proceed methodically. Texas Ranger Jim Mull transported Weatherred to the Plainview Police Department for fingerprinting and photographing. The officers explained that these were routine procedures in a homicide investigation. On the drive back to the high school, Weatherred made an unprompted statement that caught the Rangers' attention. "My prints are going to be all over the place where Bill's body was found. I've been in that house many times." Ranger Mull remained silent but noted the significance of the statement. The detectives had not disclosed to Weatherred where Strawn had been killed. His reference to that place suggested familiarity with the crime scene beyond what had been publicly reported. Up to that point, no media outlets in Plainview or Lubbock had covered the murder, as there had been no known connection between the case and the Texas Panhandle, nearly 600 miles away. "I think you've got the man," Ranger Mull later told the Conroe detectives. The investigators shared his sentiment, but knew proving it beyond a reasonable doubt would require more work. Weatherred remained free as law enforcement pressed forward with an exhaustive investigation spanning 3 months. Officers from Conroe, Plainview, Lubbock, Cress, and Dallas dedicated countless hours to verifying Weatherred's alibi and tracking his movements. The effort was closely coordinated with the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, particularly First Assistant District Attorney E.M. Rick Stover. A breakthrough came 4 days after the murder. Harris County detectives reported that Strawn's missing 1988 Oldsmobile had been recovered in Houston's notorious Fifth Ward, partially stripped and burned. It had been abandoned next to another vehicle that had been reported stolen on the same day Strawn's car had gone missing. For a brief moment, investigators considered the possibility that they had been searching for the wrong suspect. The Fifth Ward, notorious for violent crime and stolen vehicles, could have been the work of car thieves unrelated to the murder. However, detectives doubted that the perpetrators who stripped Strawn's Oldsmobile had also been involved in his death. It seemed more plausible that Strawn's killer had driven the car to a busy Houston shopping mall, left the keys in the ignition, and made it an easy target for theft. The location where Strawn's car had been abandoned led detectives to an intriguing theory. The shopping mall was situated close to Houston Intercontinental Airport, where shuttle buses ran frequently between the airport and the mall. Investigators speculated that the murderer may have used a shuttle or taxi to reach the airport after ditching the vehicle. With this new lead, detectives turned their focus to Weatherred's potential travel. If he had traveled from Plainview to Conroe and back in such a short time frame, flying would have been the most logical option. The nearest departure airport was in Lubbock, while the closest arrival to Conroe was Houston Intercontinental Airport. Investigators theorized that if Weatherred had flown, he likely used a fake name when purchasing a ticket. They checked records of airlines operating out of Lubbock and found that a 6 p.m. Sunday flight from Lubbock to Dallas-Fort Worth had direct connections to Houston. Tracking and identifying all passengers on that flight would be a painstaking process, one that could require FBI assistance. While pursuing the flight angle, detectives also worked tirelessly to verify the many phone calls Weatherred had placed to Conroe after learning that Pam Bean was engaged to another man. Every call, every lead, and every inconsistency in his alibi brought them one step closer to the truth. Pam told investigators that from the moment Jon Weatherred discovered she was involved with another man, he had bombarded her with phone calls. These calls persisted until November 23, 1988, less than 3 weeks before the murder. Weatherred had begged her to take him back and had even proposed marriage. "He was trying to get me to reveal Bill's name," Pam explained to the detectives. Pam's friends corroborated her account, stating that the coach had been relentless. One of Pam's colleagues, who had met Weatherred during his visits to Pam's place, recalled a particularly disturbing call on November 23rd. "I didn't give him the name because I was afraid he would get drunk some night and do something stupid," the friend told investigators. "Many times he asked what he could do to get her back. I told him over and over that she was happy, very much in love, and that there was nothing he could do to change her feelings for Strawn." Weatherred had also pressed for information about where Strawn was employed. "I told him I only knew it was a medical supply company," the colleague stated. According to the same friend, Weatherred's mental state declined rapidly after Pam rejected him. At first, he was just aggravated. He was confused by what was happening. Then he became a little depressed. It just escalated. I'd say he became obsessed with seeing Pam again. He was not in control. Investigators also learned that Weatherred had contacted Pam's colleague a week after Bill Strawn's murder. Detectives learned that Weatherred had been actively trying to fabricate an alibi. He had approached several people, asking them to vouch that he was in Plainview on December 12, the day Bill Strawn was murdered. A cafe employee in town reported that the coach had specifically asked him to confirm that he had been there that morning. However, the witness stated plainly that Weatherred had not been present. Investigators also followed rumors that Weatherred had attempted to hire a hitman to kill Bill Strawn. Pursuing this lead, Ranger Mull and detectives questioned a man in the county jail on an unrelated charge. The inmate confirmed that Weatherred had offered him money to carry out the murder. The investigation took another turn when detectives confronted Weatherred's college friend, the recipient of the call made from Houston Airport on December 11th. Initially, the friend claimed the call had come from a relative in Houston. However, when presented with records of Weatherred's extensive phone calls and other mounting evidence, he changed his story. He admitted that Weatherred had asked him to lie, instructing him to say the call had come from a relative. Furthermore, he revealed that Weatherred had previously inquired about hiring someone to kill Bill Strawn. The friend had refused to be involved, but, wanting to clear himself, agreed to wear a wire for his next conversation with the coach. Driving around Plainview together, the wired informant brought up the Houston Airport call. "John, man, you shot the man in the back of the head. They think the alibi was a setup, man. The way they talk, man, your ass is grass. They're gonna take me down with you, man." Weatherred denied shooting anyone, but grew visibly anxious about what his friend might tell the authorities. "You're not gonna tell them. Well, he told me to say this," he pressed the informant. "I can't hang you out to dry, but I can't hang myself either," the friend responded. "You know what I mean." The informant also revealed that Weatherred had contacted a man in the fall of 1988, asking him to travel to Houston and commit a murder. This phone call had been recorded, and the tape was turned over to law enforcement. Further interviews with high school students painted an even darker picture. Several students recalled Weatherred casually discussing how to commit the perfect murder. One student mentioned that when the topic came up, she had joked about hiring a hitman, not realizing the significance at the time. Another recalled that the coach had openly spoken about how attractive Pam Bean was in bed. At the time, the students had dismissed the conversations as inappropriate but meaningless. Additional evidence surfaced about the possible murder weapon. Two men revealed that Weatherred and Pam had frequently visited their home while they were a couple, and that Weatherred had access even when the homeowners weren't present. One of them recalled that on December 10, 2 days before the murder, he had left a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver on a gun cabinet in his bedroom. By December 13, the gun was missing. It was never found. Investigators strongly suspected that the missing gun had been used to murder Bill Strawn. Their examination of the bullet recovered from Strawn's head had determined that it came from either a .38 caliber cartridge or a .357 caliber Magnum, and forensic analysis confirmed it had been fired from a Smith & Wesson revolver. Fortunately, the owner of the missing gun still possessed the original box of ammunition. The rounds inside were hand-loaded Hornady 128-grain jacketed hollow point .357 bullets. Detectives seized the ammunition and sent it to the FBI's Trace Elements section in Washington for comparison with the bullet extracted from Strawn's brain. By March 10, 1988, after presenting their findings to the district attorney's office in Conroe, detectives secured a warrant for Jon Weatherred's arrest on a charge of capital murder. The charge was elevated to capital murder due to the multiple crimes involved. The murder, along with the robbery of Strawn's money and car. On March 13th, Sheriff Corley traveled to Plainview to join his detectives. Equipped with the arrest warrant, which had been transmitted via fax, they coordinated with Texas Rangers to carry out the apprehension. The plan was to discreetly summon Weatherred to the principal's office at the high school where he worked and arrest him without incident. However, before they could put their plan into motion, Weatherred unexpectedly exited the school building and walked toward his parked pickup truck. Concerned that he might be attempting to flee, the officer stationed near the vehicle immediately placed him under arrest. The school principal later stated that Weatherred may have simply been heading to another school where he taught a physical education class. The suspect was brought before a judicial officer who, at the request of Montgomery County authorities, denied bail. That same day, he was transported back to Conroe. Under intense interrogation, Weatherred gave what detectives described as an emotional confession. He admitted to hiring a man in a West Texas town to rough up Strawn and scare him, but he vehemently denied any involvement in the murder or even being in Conroe at the time of the crime. Following this lead, Conroe detectives traveled to the town mentioned by Weatherred and questioned the man he claimed to have paid $200 to intimidate Strawn. The man readily admitted to receiving the money, but confessed that he had spent it and never followed through with the plan. A thorough investigation, including polygraph tests, confirmed his account and eliminated him as a suspect in the murder. Meanwhile, Weatherred remained in Montgomery County Jail as detectives methodically dismantled his numerous alibis. Soon after his return to Conroe, Weatherred was placed in a live lineup. Neighbors who had reported seeing a suspicious man in the area on the morning of the murder, including one who saw a figure crouched beside Strawn's car in the garage, and another who observed a man walking up a nearby driveway, were brought in to make an identification. Earlier, they had viewed photo lineups that included Weatherred's picture, but their identifications had been tentative. However, when faced with two separate in-person lineups, the witnesses made an unequivocal identification. Jon Weatherred, the man who had been desperate to reclaim Pam Bean, was the same man they had seen near the scene of the crime on that fateful morning. On March 29th, the amassed evidence was presented to a county grand jury. The jury returned an indictment against Jon Weatherred, charging him with capital murder. The two-count indictment alleged that he had killed Bill Strawn during the commission of a burglary or robbery, elevating the crime to a capital offense, punishable by life in prison or death by lethal injection. The court set Weatherred's bond at $150,000. Friends and colleagues in his hometown, still unable to believe he was guilty, pooled resources to post bail, securing his release from jail. Jury selection for the trial took 2 weeks, resulting in a panel of 6 men and 6 women. The trial commenced on November 7, 1989, in the Conroe State District Courtroom of Judge Lee Alsworth. The courtroom was packed as First Assistant District Attorney Rick Stover delivered his opening statement. "This is going to be a long trial, but one thing I can promise you, it won't be a boring trial." Stover, a seasoned prosecutor and former defense attorney, methodically laid out the state's case. His questioning focused on Weatherred's attempts to stage a burglary, his desperate efforts to win back Pam Bean, his solicitation of contract hits on Strawn, and the incriminating phone records suggesting he had placed a call from Houston Airport mere hours before the murder in Conroe. Witnesses identified Weatherred as the man they had seen in the neighborhood on the morning of the crime. Other testimonies detailed his absence from work on the day of the murder and his later attempts to fabricate an alibi. One crucial point of evidence was the possibility that Weatherred had stolen the murder weapon. Witnesses testified that he had access to a friend's home in Lubbock, where a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver had gone missing just 2 days before Strawn was killed with a similar gun. An FBI trace metal expert provided pivotal testimony, explaining that nuclear activation tests and trace element analysis on the bullet retrieved from Strawn's head matched the remaining bullets from the stolen gun's ammunition box. The expert emphasized that the tests could distinguish trace elements down to 1 part per million. The prosecution also introduced a .357 Smith & Wesson revolver identical to the missing weapon, using it to demonstrate how the victim was believed to have been executed. While acknowledging that the displayed gun was not the actual murder weapon, the state used it as a visual aid, allowing the firearms expert to illustrate the nature of the killing. The defense countered with witnesses who swore they had seen Weatherred in plain view on the evening of December 11th and the morning of December 12th, the day of the murder. One witness claimed to have spotted him at the same time. Conroe residents reported seeing a man resembling Weatherred near the crime scene. During cross-examination, some defense witnesses wavered under scrutiny. However, the defense had at least planted a seed of doubt regarding Weatherred's whereabouts on the night before the murder. Then, an unexpected turn of events shattered that doubt. The prosecution had already rested its case when Texas Ranger Mull in Conroe, as a trial witness, received an anonymous phone call. The caller insisted that a man from Cress held crucial information that could change the course of the trial. After consulting with District Attorney Stover, Ranger Mull boarded a flight to Lubbock and then drove to Cress to pursue the new lead. Following a lead from a witness in Cress, Texas Ranger Mull traveled to Dallas, where he uncovered a major breakthrough. A Dallas witness admitted to having been on the same flight as Jon Weatherred from Lubbock to Dallas on the evening of December 11. The very flight detectives believed Weatherred had taken before connecting to Houston. The witness also revealed that a relative had been with him on the flight and could confirm Weatherred's presence. When questioned, the relative not only corroborated the story, but also produced the ticket stubs, verifying the date and flight number. This new evidence placed Weatherred en route to Houston on the night before the murder. When court resumed in Conroe, a lifelong friend of the coach took the stand, testifying that he had also seen Weatherred on the flight from Lubbock to Dallas at 6 p.m. on December 11th. The connecting flight to Houston would have placed Weatherred at his destination shortly before the call from Houston Airport to Lubbock, charged to Weatherred's residence in Cress. The defense presented its own surprise witness, a college student and friend of Weatherred, who testified that he had seen the coach at a Lubbock restaurant at 10:30 p.m. on December 11th. Additionally, a relative of Weatherred's testified that the coach had been in Cress at 5:30 p.m. that evening, shaving off his mustache before heading to Lubbock. The prosecution quickly countered. Texas Ranger Mull and Detective Peterson testified that the same relative had previously told them Weatherred shaved his mustache around Thanksgiving, 2 weeks before the murder. Even Weatherred himself had initially stated during questioning that he had shaved his mustache at that time. The discrepancy cast doubt on the defense's timeline. After nearly 4 weeks of conflicting testimony, both sides rested their cases on December 4th. The state emphasized the circumstantial and eyewitness evidence linking Weatherred to the crime, while the defense tried to plant doubt regarding his whereabouts. In closing arguments, District Attorney Stover and Assistant DA Barbara Hale laid out the prosecution's case. Weatherred, driven by jealousy, flew to Houston, traveled to the Woodlands, and made his way along a running trail to Pam Bean's home. After murdering Strawn, he stole the victim's car, abandoned it at a Houston shopping mall, and then flew back to Lubbock. The prosecution highlighted the tape recording of Weatherred driving around Plainview with a friend, in which he was heard saying, "I called him and told him I was going to need an alibi." Stover addressed the jury. "Folks, you just heard Jon Weatherred tell you that the day Bill Strawn was killed, he called looking for an alibi. Why on earth would he need an alibi if he didn't do it? To me, you could convict if you didn't have anything but this tape." The defense acknowledged that Weatherred had made poor choices, including trying to hire someone to scare Strawn and attempting to fabricate an alibi. However, they argued that these actions did not prove he committed murder. "Find this man guilty, guilty, guilty," Stover urged the jurors. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of capital murder committed during a robbery. Weatherred choked back tears as the verdict was read. Later, he told reporters, "I could live with it if I had done it." The jury now had to determine his sentence, life in prison or death by lethal injection. During the punishment phase, the defense contended that while Weatherred's actions may have contributed to the murder, he never intended for Strawn to die. They argued there was reasonable doubt that he had been the actual shooter and urged the jury to spare his life based on his past respectable reputation. Assistant Prosecutor Hale countered, arguing that Weatherred's position as a well-respected coach made his crime even more chilling. Standing close to the defendant, District Attorney Stover delivered his final words. "You're going to meet your maker. When you do, I hope he has more mercy on your wretched soul than you did on Bill Strawn." After another 6 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced Jon Weatherred to life in prison. The verdict was rendered on December 12, 1989, exactly 1 year after Bill Strawn's murder. Weatherred was retried in the spring of 1995, found guilty again, and sentenced once more to life in prison. In 1998, the Ninth District Court ruled 2-1 that the trial judge had erred by not allowing an expert witness to testify about the unreliability of eyewitness accounts. However, the conviction was ultimately upheld. In July 2003, Weatherred died in the state prison hospital in Galveston at the age of 45. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, his cause of death was not released, but it was not related to violence. Weatherred, who had spent his final years incarcerated at the Ellis and Estelle units, had been working as a prison baker until his passing.